Good morning, Joey. How are you today?
I'm terrific. How are you?
I am just fine. Are you ready to learn about misplaced and dangling modifiers?
I sure am.
Awesome. Well, let's get started then. First of all, modifiers, if you'll remember from last one, adjectives and adverbs are modifiers. Sometimes we're confused by the word modifier and much more comfortable with adjectives and adverbs. So just remember that adjectives and adverbs are modifiers. Modifiers are adjectives and adverbs. And now what we're going to learn about, we're going to see how phrases and clauses can be modifiers, i.e. adjectives and adverbs. Okay. Last workshop, we looked at single word adjectives and adverbs, i.e. modifiers. And we learned that adjectives modify nouns and pronouns. That is their only job. We learned that adverbs modify everything else except for nouns and pronouns. That includes verbs, adjectives, and other adverbs. And although in our last work, we focused on adjectives and adverbs that were single words, phrases and dependent clauses can also be adjectives and adverbs, and that's what we're going to look at today. And because phrases and clauses can be adjectives and adverbs, that means they can be modifiers. And those modifiers can be either misplaced or left dangling in a sentence. So let's look at a few definitions. A modifier, a word, phrase, or clause that describes or changes our understanding, i.e. the picture in our heads of another word in the sentence. Misplaced modifier, a word, phrase, or clause that is in the wrong place in the sentence, causing confusion or misunderstanding for the reader. A dangling modifier, and this is the one that's a little confusing, but that just means that the modifying word, phrase, or clause, it has no word in the sentence to modify, so it's just dangling there with nothing to attach itself to. And for a more in-depth explanation of modifier, watch our video on adjectives and adverbs. Questions so far, Joey? Okay, and let's get started. Phrases and clauses as modifiers. What kind of phrases can be modifiers? All of them. Our verbal phrases, which are our infinitive phrases, our present participle phrases, and our past participle phrases. You might remember those from our workshop on verbs and verbals. Prepositional phrases. Dependent adjective clauses, which we haven't talked about a lot. We spent a lot of time on dependent clauses that start with subordinating conjunctions. Today, we're going to look at the other types of dependent clauses, the ones that begin with relative pronouns. Let's start with our verbal phrases, though. As we learned in our workshop, verbs versus verbals, verbals are verb forms that do not change form to indicate time. In other words, they have no tense. Every single verb in the English language has three verbal forms: the infinitive, the present participle, and the past participle. The infinitive, those are the verb forms that always begin with to. This is just a little refresher course on the verbs versus verbals. The present participle, you remember what those are, Joey?
ING words, yeah.
ING words, good job. And our past participles, which can look like a regular past tense verb, or they can be some kind of strange verb form like broken or eaten. All of these verbals can function as modifiers. Therefore, they can accidentally become misplaced or dangling modifiers. And we're going to take them one at a time. We're going to start with the infinitive. Every single verb has an infinitive form. And here's some examples. To be, to walk, to laugh, to cry, to defeat, to run, to see, to break, to eat. Joey, can you think of a few others? Just think of a verb and then put to in front of it.
To play.
To play. Can you think of another one?
To sing.
To sing. To learn. All kinds of fun ones. Every single verb form has an infinitive form. Now, an infinitive phrase, this is interesting because infinitive phrases, they can function as either a noun or as an adjective modifying a noun. Let's look at how that works. Here are some examples of infinitives as nouns. I love to walk my dog every morning. John hates to run. I have been trying to eat healthier food. Do you see the infinitives, Joey?
Yes.
Can you tell me what they are?
To walk, to run, to eat.
There you go. To walk, and then that phrase has an object. There's a noun in it. To walk my dog. They don't always have a noun following the verb form, but for example, that is the thing I love. What do I love? To walk my dog. Now, the next one does not have an object. It's just simply to plus the verb form. I love to run. And guess what? Or John hates to run. That is the thing that John hates. He hates to run. See how these function as nouns?
Yes.
I can say, I love chocolate. John hates chocolate, right? And guess what? To eat healthier food is the thing that I have been trying. Any questions about these infinitives as nouns, Joey?
No, not yet.
Okay, well, now let's look at these same infinitives functioning as adjectives. Now, because we tend to think of adjectives as a single word, and sometimes we get stuck on the idea of adjectives as describing. And we saw in our last workshop that that is one of the ways adjectives can modify. But they can do other things other than describe. But what they do, the big picture of adjectives, is that they change the picture in our head of the noun or the pronoun. They give us a new idea or new information, a little bit more information that helps make sure that the picture in the reader's or the listener's head is closer to the picture in the writer or the speaker's head. So let's see how these infinitives function as adjectives. To walk his dog every morning, John wakes up early. To run longer distances, John must get in better shape. To eat healthier food, I avoid fast food. There's a noun, John. Remember, adjectives modify nouns and pronouns. There's the noun, John. There's a pronoun, I. To walk his dog every morning. There's an adjective phrase because it is changing our understanding of John. It is giving us a little bit more detailed picture of John. To run longer distances, John. To eat healthier food, I. So I'll let you just look at those for a minute, Joey, and see if you have any questions about that. Well, I take a sip of water.
I think it's good. I think I understand. What would you say for the last one? What would it change it if I just said to eat healthier, I avoid fast food?
Nothing at all. It would change nothing at all. That's a very good question, by the way. Now, because infinitive phrases can be adjectives, they should be as close as possible to the noun or pronoun they are modifying. To walk the dog, John wakes up earlier than his wife. John, to walk the dog, wakes up earlier than his wife. See how that adjective infinitive phrase, the first one is in front of the noun it's modifying, and in the second case, it's after the noun it's modifying. And our sentence is very, very clear. Let's look at this one. John wakes up earlier than his wife to walk the dog. That could be a little confusing. The reader has to think a minute. Who's walking the dog? And in a more complex sentence, it can absolutely be confusing. But this is considered a misplaced modifier because to walk the dog is closer to the noun wife than it is to the noun John, and John is the one that walks the dog. So what is our rule? Okay, the rule is, do you remember the rule?
Keep it close to the noun.
Keep it as close to the noun as possible. That's right. So now we have to be careful not to leave infinitive modifiers dangling. A dangling modifier means there's no noun or pronoun to connect with the adjective phrase. This happens a lot because when we're writing or when we're speaking, we understand exactly what it is we're trying to convey. We understand, we know the picture in our head is fine. We're just trying to get that picture into our listener or our reader's head. Sometimes we leave things out. And if we leave that noun or pronoun out and we just have the modifier, the infinitive phrase in this case, just hanging there, sometimes the listener or the reader is not going to have the full picture. So we have to make sure that we always have a noun. Let's look at this one. To walk the dog, John. There's the infinitive modifying phrase. There's the noun. John to walk the dog. Let's look at this one. To walk the dog, it should not be raining. Who's walking the dog here? There's a dangling modifier. And this happens a lot. So we just have to, when we do our careful proofreading and we see that infinitive adjective phrase, we've got to make sure that we actually have a noun there. How would you reword this sentence?
I probably would say for John to walk the dog, it should not be raining.
Yeah, exactly. Or we can just turn that infinitive phrase into another group of words, right? It should not be raining if someone wants to walk their dog. If we're talking bigger than John, right? We just need to rewrite the entire sentence. And that's the key with dangling modifiers. With a misplaced modifier, you just got to get it in the right place. With a dangling modifier, you have to rewrite the entire sentence. Sometimes it's a very simple rewrite. Sometimes it's a little bit more complicated. But what you need to do as a writer, when you find that dangling modifier, you got to get back to the picture in your head. What is it that you're trying to get across to your reader? And then just reword that so that that picture is absolutely clear in your reader's head. Does that make sense?
Yes.
All right, well, let's practice. Which of the following has a dangling modifier? You can read them out loud if you'd like.
Okay. To be a good student, one must be prepared to spend time reading and studying. I think to be a good student describes one. So I think that is okay. John does not like to swim in the ocean or to walk along the beach. To swim, to walk describes John. So I think that's okay. A lot of practice is required to play the piano well. So that does not have a noun to modify.
Exactly. Now, I want to point out something to you in B because I was a little bit tricky here. Remember when we first talked about infinitives, we said that they can be nouns?
Okay.
And that's what they are here. These are the things that John does not like. He does not like to swim in the ocean. He does not like to walk along the beach. So in those cases, your two infinitives are nouns. They're not adjectives. They're not modifiers.
Okay.
It's a little bit tricky, right? So it's very important to remember that those infinitives can be two different things. And it's only when they're acting like an adjective that they can be misplaced.
Okay.
And you're absolutely correct. C has a dangling modifier. How would you rewrite C?
The simplest way I think would be a lot of practice is required for someone to play the piano well.
There you go. That would do it. Good job. Which of the following has no misplaced? Remember, we learned that no is an adjective. It's an important little adjective, right? Because it negates misplaced or dangling modifiers, right? So which of the following has no misplaced or dangling modifiers?
Okay. So to succeed as a comedian, John has to quit his day job and has moved to New York City. To succeed as a comedian, belonging to a comedy club is an excellent way to make contacts, and John's dreams are supported by his wife to move to New York City and become a comedian. Okay, so I think it's A has no misplaced or dangling modifiers because to succeed as a comedian is right beside the noun John. The second one has none, so it's dangling. And the third one, C, is confusing because it's supposed to, we don't know if it describes John or his wife to move.
Or John's dreams.
Or John's dream. Yeah, that's what I meant. John's dreams. Yeah.
Yeah, exactly. Good. And once again, you're absolutely correct. A is the one that has no misplaced dangling modifiers. Love our little dancing letters. They're so happy, aren't they? Okay, verbal phrases. Let's move on to the present participle. All right, and you remember the present participle?
ING.
ING words, there you go. And just like with our infinitive, every single verb in the English language has a present participle. We have being, walking, laughing, crying, defeating, running, seeing, breaking, and eating. Can you think of a couple of more?
Kicking.
Yeah, good. Kicking, learning, right?
Reading.
Okay,
Yeah,
good.
reading.
Every single verb. Running, trying, every verb. Okay. Present participle phrases are phrases that contain ing words. An ing word. Now, here's an interesting thing about a present participles. Remember how our infinitives could either be a noun or an adjective phrase?
Yeah.
Well, our present participles can be three things. It can function as a noun. It can be part of a verb. It can function as a noun. It can function as a single word adjective or part of an adjective phrase. Now, let's think about this ing word as a single word adjective. We use these all the time and probably never even think about them. So when we say something like, I wish I had a swimming pool in my backyard. What kind of pool do I want?
Swimming.
A swimming pool. Okay. I would love to take a dancing class. What kind of class would I like to take?
Dancing.
Okay. These writing workshops help students. What kind of workshops?
Writing.
Absolutely good. We do it all the time. We have running shoes. We even have laughing cow cheese. Right? Adjectives. Let's see how that works with the verb, part of a verb, with the gerund, and with the phrase. Let's look at it as part of a verb. That woman is swimming with sharks. What is the woman doing? Where's our verb, Joey?
Is swimming.
Is swimming. That's exactly right. Notice that swimming by itself cannot be a verb. It always has to have a form of be in front of it to complete its meaning and to give it a sense of time. Let's look at it as an adjective phrase. The woman swimming with sharks was seriously injured. What woman?
Swimming with sharks.
The swimming with sharks woman. Exactly. And now let's look at it as a noun, aka a gerund. Now, gerund is a funny kind of word, but all that word means is an ing word acting like a noun. Swimming with sharks is dangerous. What is the thing that is dangerous?
Swimming with sharks.
There you go. And that is the thing. So again, an ing word by itself can be a single word adjective. It can be part of a verb. It can be part of a present participle phrase. It can function as a noun. When it functions as a noun, it's called a gerund. Any questions so far? Let's see how that works with this phrase, driving to Orlando. Driving to Orlando. Driving to Orlando, Sue saw a rainbow. Notice how, if I change that to eating pizza, Sue saw a rainbow. Your picture of Sue just changed, didn't it? It went from her driving to Orlando to her eating pizza. Okay, that's how these phrases modify nouns. So there we have it in front of Sue. Sue, driving to Orlando, saw a rainbow. But now let's look at this one. Sue saw a rainbow driving to Orlando. That's a funny misplaced modifier because rainbows can't drive.
Mm-mm.
Right? So your reader's going to laugh. Ha ha ha. They misplaced their modifier because we know rainbows can't drive. But in this sentence, we know Sue was driving right? We know Sue was driving because rainbows can't drive. So it's kind of funny. It's not really going to confuse or mislead our reader. But let's do the exact same structure. Sue saw her brother driving to Orlando. Now, if Sue is the one driving to Orlando, this is very serious because we have completely misled our reader. We know Sue was the one driving to Orlando when she saw her brother, but our reader is going to assume that that Sue saw her brother while her brother was driving to Orlando. So that's why we have to be very, very careful to put our modifiers in the right place. Because sometimes we'll just make our readers laugh. Other times we will completely confuse or mislead our readers. So what's the rule? Present participle adjective phrases. And I didn't even put present because we're going to see the exact same rule for our past participle phrases. Here's the rule. They must come in front of or after the noun they are modifying. That is the only place you can ever put them, is right in front of or right after the noun they're modifying. Questions so far?
Oh, got it.
Now, what about dangling modifiers? Present participle adjective phrases can also become dangling modifiers. A dangling modifier means there is no noun or pronoun to connect with the adjective phrase. Driving to Orlando, my car ran out of gas. Now, yes, we do have AI. We've got cars that theoretically can drive themselves, but honestly, they can't drive themselves because there still has to be a person behind the steering wheel, right? So this is wrong because who is driving? Cars don't drive.
Yeah.
Okay, they really don't. They may say self-driving, but they're really not, because they have to have a human being there doing some level of control. So that's considered a dangling modifier. Now, remember, with our dangling modifiers, unlike the misplaced, we can't just move it around. We can't just move this driving to Orlando. There's no place else in this sentence to put it because there is no noun. We have to completely rewrite the entire sentence. While my brother was driving my car to Orlando, it ran out of gas. See how that works? Now let's look at another one. While walking the dog, emergency weather signs began blaring. Who's walking the dog? Sirens don't walk. Have to rewrite it. While I was walking the dog, emergency weather sirens began blaring. Questions?
No.
Again, misplaced modifiers, you've just got to find the right place to put them. Dangling modifiers, you have to rewrite the entire sentence and make sure that there is a noun. So let's look at while my brother was driving my car to Orlando, it ran out of gas. All right, that is a dependent clause and then an independent clause, right? The same with while I was walking the dog. So we took that phrase, driving to Orlando, and we made it into an entire dependent clause. While my brother was driving. Notice how driving now became part of a verb. We put a form of be in front of it, was driving. All right? And then the subject is brother. Let's look at this next sentence. While I was walking the dog. There's our dependent clause. Where's the verb in this sentence, Joey?
Was walking.
And what's the subject of that verb?
I.
Yeah, it doesn't make sense to take that was out. While I walking the dog.
Right.
Right. While my brother driving my car. Right. We have to have that form of be in front of the present participle, and together they make a verb. Questions?
No.
Okay. What's our rule? Dangling modifiers cannot be fixed by moving them around. The entire sentence must be rewritten. Now, the past participle is very much like the present participle, except the past participle can't really be left dangling. It's not likely that we will ever dangle a past participle like the infinitive and the present participle. A past participle can be part of a verb. It can also function as a single word adjective or part of an adjective phrase. Let's see how that works, but it cannot be a noun. Every now and then you'll see it as a noun in a weird kind of a sentence, but not usually. And I'll show you how you might see it as a noun after we look at it as part of a verb, after we look at it as a single word adjective, and after we look at it as part of an adjective phrase. Okay. Past participle as part of a verb. Our team has defeated their team 3 times. What has our team done?
Has defeated.
There's our verb. Now here it is as a single word adjective. The defeated team left the field. What kind of team?
Defeated.
Yep, there's your adjective. Now let's look at it as part of a phrase. Defeated by their rivals, the team left the field. What kind of team?
The team that was defeated by their rivals.
The defeated by their rivals team. There you go. Now let's talk about how this word defeated might sometimes be seen as a noun, not usually. Maybe in poetry, or in some kind of like a little weird moral saying, like the defeated always have the chance to rise again. You're right, the defeated. But you're really not going to see that. Very, very seldom will you ever see that, and you should probably never write it because it's going to be a little bit loftier, philosophical way of using this past participle. Unlike your present participle, which can be a noun lots of times. So that is one important difference between the past participle and the present participle. So past participle adjective phrases can easily become misplaced modifiers. Defeated by a rival team. Let's look at this one. Defeated by a rival team, the Snowbirds left the field before the award ceremony. There's our adjective phrase. There's the noun. The Snowbirds, defeated by their rival team, left the field before the award ceremony. Now let's look at this one. The Snowbirds left the field before the award ceremony, defeated by a rival team. Award ceremony, the field, the Snowbirds. Misplaced modifier. Why? Because just like with the present participle, the rule is past participle adjective phrases must come in front of or after the noun they are modifying. Any questions so far, Joey?
Nope.
Okay. Ready to practice?
I think.
Okay. Would you like to read these out loud?
Sure. Okay. Which of the following has no misplaced or dangling? Following the instructions on the test carefully, John finished 5 minutes before time was up. John left the restaurant feeling slightly ill. John carefully read the poem, confused by iambic pentameter. John was late to class, running into the room after the teacher had begun taking attendance. So I think A is no misplaced or dangling modifiers. We have following the instructions describes John. The second one, though, John left the restaurant feeling slightly ill. Well, restaurant and John are both nouns, so we don't know which one it modifies. So that would be misplaced. And then John carefully read the poem. Is the poem confused or is John confused? So that would be misplaced. And John was late to class, running into the room after the teacher. I think that's a missing. I think that's dangling, but it's either dangling or misplaced.
Well, what if we move that entire thing to the front of, let's see, running into the room, John was late to class after the teacher had begun taking attendance.
That would, yeah, because otherwise it looks like he's running into the room after the teacher.
Yeah.
It could. I
Yes,
mean, if I start reading it, I might start thinking that. So,
absolutely.
or
Yeah,
you
you're
could say
absolutely.
John running into the classroom was late to class after that. So, okay. Yeah, I
Yeah,
see.
you could, I think you could even say John running into the room after the teacher had begun taking attendance was late to class. No, that wouldn't work either. Yes, this is a complicated sentence. Really have to think about this one, right?
Mhm.
And maybe even just rewrite it. Like after the teacher had begun taking, John was late to class and ran into the room after the teacher had begun taking attendance. So maybe just
Yep.
get rid of the modifier altogether, running into the room, and give it a verb. John was late to class and ran into the room after the teacher had begun taking attendance. Yeah, I think that would be a lot clearer to just completely rewrite this one. And A is the only sentence that is correct. One more. Which of the following has a dangling modifier?
Okay. Okay. So struggling to make ends meet in today's economy, many people feel they cannot afford college. Struggling to make ends meet in today's economy means many people cannot afford college. Struggling to make ends meet in today's economy, college seems out of reach for many people. Okay, so it's C. A is okay because struggling to make ends meet describes many people. B is okay because struggling to make ends meet is acting as a noun. And then the last one, there's nobody, it's the college isn't struggling, it's the people that are struggling. So
Good. Good job.
where's
There it is.
the
Good job. All right, let's practice again.
Okay, which of the following sentences has a misplaced modifier? Bill, tired after a night of studying, fell asleep during the test. That's good because tired after a night of studying describes Bill. Tired of never getting enough sleep, cutting back on his late night work shifts was a great change for Bill. That seems like it's misplaced. Let's look at C. Bill, though trying to save money, refuses suggestions to cut back on employees' benefits. So it would be B, because though trying to save money describes Bill. So that one's okay.
All right, and C, what is to cut back on employees' benefits modifying?
Oh, okay. Suggestions.
Yes, it is. Yes, it is. Good. Yep. Excellent. Yay. Good job, Joey. I think you have nailed this misplaced modifier and dangling modifier. You're doing great. Okay, now that's it for our verbal phrases. Now let's look at prepositional phrases as modifiers. Now, a lot of students are confused by prepositions, and a lot of students who are learning English as a second or third language struggle with when to use what preposition. Well, we're not going to go into when do I use in or when do I use on. I'm going to give you a couple of little hints, but that, and I'm going to explain why we're not going to cover that aspect of prepositional phrases. We're going to look at prepositional phrases as modifiers. So every single prepositional phrase begins with a preposition and includes at least one noun or pronoun. As adjectives or adverbs, prepositional phrases add important details to our sentences. Let's look at some prepositional phrases that begin with the preposition in. Okay. In the rain. And rain is the object of the preposition. There's your noun. In an hour. Hour is the object of the preposition in. It is the noun. In my car. Here we have a pronoun, my, and a noun, car. In the snow. In 5 years. Remember when we said numbers are adjectives? So you will find adjectives and adverbs in prepositional phrases, even though the entire prepositional phrase is also acting like an adjective or an adverb. In the hospital. But before we look at some more prepositions, let's look at in my car. Now, my car is a vehicle. that I ride in. Sometimes I'm driving, sometimes I'm a passenger, right? Even if I'm a passenger, I get in my car. But what if I'm a passenger on a bus? Do I get in the bus? What do I do?
On the bus.
Why? What's the difference?
Hmm.
There really isn't.
Yeah.
English is just, that's why I say I cannot teach you all of the rules for when to choose a particular preposition. Now, when we're talking very physically, we put something in a drawer and we set it on our desk. So there's that logistical space thing. But we also use prepositions for a little bit more abstract things. Let's talk about time. In 5 years. In 5 years, right? In the morning. But what about night? Am I going to say in the night? I'm going to say at night, right? Right.
Or
And I'm
noon.
going to, yeah, exactly. Yes. At or at noon, in the morning, but at noon, but in the afternoon, but at night. See, again, for an hour, right? On Monday, right? So again, that's why we're not going to cover the use. The best advice I can give to those of you watching the video, if English is not your first language, I've made this suggestion to many, many, many students. Get yourself a cheap magazine at one of the grocery stores or at a department store. Grab a magazine about something you like and get a highlighter. And open up, go a paragraph at a time, start with one paragraph, and use your highlighter to highlight every single preposition that you see in that paragraph. Then take a pencil and put the prepositional phrase in parentheses, and then just out loud read those prepositional phrases and move on. Because what you're doing is you're creating a memory bank of how these prepositions are used in English sentences. And from that memory bank, when you start to write, you're going to be more likely to choose the correct preposition. If you write the incorrect preposition and read it out loud, it's going to sound off to you, just like in the bus to those of us that are native speakers. Does that make sense, Joey?
Yeah.
So that's just a little tip for those of you that are learning English. So let's look at these common prepositions. About, above, across, after, among, around, as, at, because of, before, behind, below, beneath, beside, between, by, during. A lot of people don't realize that that looks like an ing word. It is, ends in ing, but it's actually a preposition. Except, for, from, in spite of, there's a preposition with 3 words, into, like, near, of, on the bus or the train, onto, over, past, since, though, till, to, toward, under, until, up, upon, with, without. And now, why did I highlight some of those? The words that are highlighted in yellow, these are sometimes subordinating conjunctions. Sometimes they're a preposition, sometimes they're a subordinating conjunction. And the way to know the difference is, are they followed by a subject and a verb? Because if they're followed by a subject and a verb, they're a subordinating conjunction. If they've got a subject and a verb, they cannot be a preposition because subjects and verbs don't live in phrases. They only live in clauses. So what's the difference between I went for a walk after dinner, prepositional phrase. I went for a walk after I ate dinner. After is a subordinating conjunction. Right? But now what about the green one? Well, the word for is sometimes a preposition. I walked for an hour, but for can also be a coordinating conjunction, introducing the cause of something. To, as we've already seen, is sometimes an infinitive. If it's followed by a verb form, it's an infinitive. If it's followed by a noun or pronoun, it's a preposition. And like is sometimes a verb. She sings like a bird. I like to hear her sing. And to hear her sing, that's the thing I like. Okay, so those of you that struggle with prepositions, you can either take a picture of this, write these down is a really good thing to do. Just look at this screen and write all of these prepositions down, or you can simply go online and type in common prepositions in English. But I suggest that when you do your little magazine highlighting and thing, that you have a list of the prepositions right there with you so that you can check them. All right. With that being said, let's move on to prepositional phrases as modifiers. Prepositional phrases can be either adjectives modifying nouns or pronouns, or adverbs. Now, our verbal phrases can't be adverbs. They can do a lot of things, but none of them are adverbs. Your infinitive, your present participle, your past participle, they are never adjectives. They might be other things. I mean, they're never adverbs. They'll be adjectives. Sometimes they can be nouns, right? But they're never going to be adverbs. Prepositional phrases can either be adjectives or adverbs. And prepositional phrases can show up anywhere in your sentence, anywhere. But if a prepositional phrase is in the wrong place, it is a misplaced modifier and can really confuse or misread readers. Let's see how that works. Let's look at some adjective prepositional phrases. And we're going to use in. The exhibit is in the museum. What is in the museum?
Exhibit.
Absolutely. Right? If I say the exhibit is in the street, your picture of the exhibit just changed. There's an adjective prepositional phrase. Now let's look at this one. The exhibit is Picasso's early work in the museum. There's your prepositional adjective phrase. But what's it modifying? Misplaced modifier. The exhibit in the museum is Picasso's early work. That's how we would rewrite that one. In the museum, exhibit. So what's the rule? Adjective prepositional phrases can be placed anywhere in a sentence as long as the noun pronoun they modify is the one closest to the phrase. So you got to make sure you don't have any nouns or pronouns in between the one that's being modified and the phrase itself. Now let's look at them as adverbs. This gets a little trickier. Now, is the hat in the museum? We don't know. We have no idea if the hat is still in the museum or not. But we do know that that's where this action happened. It happened in the museum, right? Her hat may not be in the museum anymore. Somebody may have taken it. It may have been thrown in the garbage and be gone, right? But we know that that's where that action happened. And notice that there's no other verb between lost and the adverb phrase in the museum. Now let's look at this one. Sue lost her hat, which her dying mother made in the museum. Guess what? Now it sounds like her dying mother made the hat in the museum. How are we going to rewrite that? Remember, we can put it anywhere. In the museum, comma, introductory phrase. Sue lost her hat. And then I'm able to add that other information. But you've got to keep that adverb phrase next as close to the verb that it's modifying, right? Adverb prepositional phrases can be placed anywhere in a sentence as long as the verb they modify is the one closest to the phrase. Questions, Joey?
No.
Let's practice. Which of the following sentences has a misplaced modifier?
Okay. Misplaced. Janine was distracted by the construction outside the classroom while she was taking her test. While taking her test, Janine was distracted by the construction outside the classroom. Janine was distracted while she was taking her test by the construction outside the classroom. So I think A has the misplaced modifier. B is okay because while taking her test, um, is,
It's a little confusing, isn't it?
yeah, I think it's describing
Well, we have two
distracted,
prepositions.
so that would be adverb, and then Janine was distracted while she was taking her test would be close to, oh, that would be close to distracted, so that will work. But the first one, I'm confused, so I'm thinking while she was taking her test is not close enough.
Okay, let's take a look at let's look at our prepositional phrases. By the construction, there's a prepositional phrase. Put in parentheses, by the construction. Is it an adjective or an adverb phrase? What do you think? What's it modify?
It modifies distracted.
Yep. So it's an adverb. It's actually the thing that was distracting her.
Okay, so that works.
Yeah, because if I say she was distracted by a fly, we're changing our understanding of that verb, what it was that was distracting her. Yes, so that one's in the right place because it's right next to the adverb. Now let's look at outside the classroom.
Right.
What is that modifying?
Confusing because I don't know if the construction was outside the classroom or Janine was outside the classroom.
Well, what's it closest to?
By the construction. So, okay, so it would have to modify construction.
Yep. Janine was distracted by the construction outside the classroom.
So that would be adjective describing construction. Oh, okay.
While she was taking her test.
Okay, that works.
Yeah, it does. It does. It does. Now, I think the while she was taking her test, that dependent clause confused you, right? It might have been better to have it in front. That's a style issue. It's not confusing because while she was taking her test is a dependent clause. We know that she is replacing Janine. So we know that Janine was distracted, that Janine was taking her test. And we know that while these things were happening at the same time.
Okay.
All right.
Let's look at B, it seems fine because while taking her test
is modifying Janine.
Yeah, it's modifying Janine and she's right next to that. So
by the construction is modifying
distracted.
And outside the classroom is modifying
the construction.
So let's look at C. So let's look at by the construction.
Okay. Taking her, so was she taking her test beside the construction that was going on? It could mean that, or she was distracted by the construction. So that would be the misplaced.
Yes, absolutely. Yeah, these prepositional phrases, when they function as, and I think it's because they can be adjectives or adverbs, right? And as we saw within the museum, it could be an adjective. That exact same phrase could be an adverb. So this is what makes prepositional phrases confusing. And so it's very, very important that I love to put my prepositional phrases in parentheses. And then I say, okay, what's this modifying? And how close is it? Is there anything in between what it's modifying that might cause confusion for my reader? And so it really is a process of again, isolating them and then knowing what they're modifying. And yes, C has the misplaced modifier. So no worries, Joe, you've done great so far. It's not surprising that you get a little tripped up with the prepositional phrases. So let's look at another one. Which of the following sentences has a misplaced modifier?
Okay, so without his glasses, Amir misread several questions on the test. Amir misread several questions on the test without his glasses. Amir didn't have his glasses, so he misread several questions on the test. Okay, so let's look at the phrases. So without his glasses describes Amir. So that works. On the test describes the questions. So that works. Amir misread several questions on the test. So on the test describes questions, but without his glasses, it's very far away from Amir. So that would probably be misplaced. The last one is fine because the only phrase is on the test and that describes questions.
So how would you fix B?
Amir, without his glasses, misread several questions on the test.
Exactly. Or without his glasses, comma, Amir misread several questions on the test. The
first
lovely
one.
thing, yeah, is that we can move these prepositional phrases any place in the sentence, and that makes it really easy for us. Good. Once we recognize that we have a misplaced modifier. Okay. So which of the following sentences has no misplaced modifiers? And there are 4 of them. A little bit more
Okay.
difficult here. Yeah.
Okay, on Saturday, Juliana went to the library with her sister to show her how to do research. Amir congratulated Elena on her presentation at the end of class. Jamal found a great research article in the library about his thesis. Javier sold furniture made by his grandfather at the family yard sale. Okay, so I think the only one is A, but I'm going to break down the others. Amir congratulated Elena, so on her presentation at the end of class. So at the end of class could either describe congratulated or presentation. So I'm confused as was it the presentation she did at the end of class, or at the end of class did Amir congratulate her? So that one would be misplaced. And then Jamal found a great research article in the library about his thesis. So about his thesis would describe the article, not the library. So I think that's misplaced. And then Javier sold furniture made by his grandfather at the family yard sale. I don't know if his grandfather made it at the yard sale, or if he was selling the furniture at the yard sale.
Good.
How about C? I'm still a little confused about C. Was I right about that?
C also has a misplaced modifier. Yeah, because you don't know about his thesis. Is the library about his thesis?
Okay.
Right?
Yeah.
Yes, exactly. So yeah. So A is correct. Good. That was a tricky one.
Yeah.
Okay, so now let's look at our adjective dependent clauses. All right, and for a quick refresher course on independent and dependent clauses, check out our video on fragments. What do adjective dependent clauses do? Well, like all the other adjectives, they modify nouns and pronouns. They usually begin with the relative pronoun. Who, whom, whose, that, which, whoever, and whomever. Sometimes they begin with where or when. So let's look at some adjective clauses and see how they modify nouns and pronouns. Who study hard. That come from the library's database. Whose name is Isaiah. Whom students dearly loved. When there is no moon. Where no ocean shoreline exists, which many people consider to be great pets for children. Notice that each of these groups of words contain a subject and a verb. Who? Sometimes the subject is the relative pronoun itself. Sometimes it's not. Sometimes the noun that is the subject of the verb is not the relative pronoun. And I'm going to explain to you why in a minute after we look at our verbs. Okay, now let's look at our verbs. In who study hard, what's the verb, Joey?
Study.
Absolutely. And the subject of the study is the relative pronoun who. Come, and the subject is that. But now let's look at whose name is Isaiah. What's the verb there?
Is.
Absolutely. And the subject is name. And students want to know, when do I use who and when do I use whom? The difference is you use the word who if it is the subject of the verb. if there is no other noun in that clause to be the subject. Like, look at this, whom students dearly loved. Here we have a noun inside that clause that is the subject of the verb. Therefore, I'm not going to use who, I'm going to use whom. Who is the subject, whom is not.
Okay.
It's really that simple. Okay. Oh, look at this one. Here, the subject is after the verb. Isn't that interesting? Remember in subject verb agreement when we said if our clause begins with there or here, the subject is always going to come after the verb. Shoreline exists. People consider. But none of these can stand alone as a sentence. They all have subjects and verbs, but none of them can stand by themselves as a sentence because they're dependent. Just like a dependent child needs an independent adult to care for them, a dependent clause has to be connected to an independent clause. So let's do that. There are all of our dependent clauses. Once again, let's connect them to independent clauses. Students who study hard are likely to be successful in school. So students are likely to be successful in school is my independent clause. My son is visiting me tomorrow. His name just happens to be Isaiah. Dr. Joe, whom the students dearly love, died today. Dr. Joe died today. Nights are lovely. What? Nights when there are no moon are lovely. I only use sources that come from the library's database. Countries are landlocked. Countries where there is no ocean shoreline. Dalmatians can be quite vicious. What? Dalmatians, which many people consider to be great pets for children. All right. Now let's see how these things function as adjectives. Modifying the noun students, whose name is Isaiah, modifying the noun son, whom students dearly loved, modifying Dr. Joe. When there is no moon, modifying the noun night. What about that come from the library's database? What noun is that modifying, Joey?
Sources.
Perfect. What about where there is no ocean shoreline? What noun is that modifying?
Countries.
What about which many people consider to be great pets for children?
Dalmatians.
Absolutely. So guess what our rule is? Adjective clauses must come immediately after the noun they're modifying. Any questions about this?
Mm-mm.
You want to look at those again?
No, I got it, I think.
Okay. Adjective clauses must come immediately after the noun they are modifying. Let's practice. Which of the following sentences has no misplaced modifier?
Okay. Julio worked for weeks on his paper about medical technology, and the paper helped him get an A in the class. Julio's paper for his medical technology class that he worked on for weeks helped him get an A in the class. Julio's paper on medical technology helped him get an A in a class that he had worked on for weeks. So it's A and B because Julio's paper for his medical technology class, you don't know if it was a technology class that he worked on for weeks or the paper. And then this last one, paper on medical that helped him get an A in the class. So you don't know if he worked on the A in the class for weeks or the medical technology paper.
Okay, but which one has no misplaced modifiers?
A. Oh. Right, A.
You're right. Good, because
Yes,
B
I got
does have,
confused.
right? Exactly.
Yes. Yeah, so B and C have it, and then A is all good.
Good job.
And
Good
when
job.
you read it out loud, you can kind of hear it sometimes.
reading out loud is an amazing proofreading skill. But you have to read slowly, number one, and number two, you got to make sure you read the words actually on the page. Now, because you didn't write these words, it's much more likely you're going to read exactly what's on the page. But if you've written the words, you have to be very careful because you may read what you thought you put on the page. So it's very important to slow down and make sure you actually read the words on the page. All right. Which of the following sentences has a misplaced modifier?
Okay, because he did not have his glasses while taking the test, Amir missed several questions that he knew the answers to. Without his glasses, Amir missed several questions on the test that he knew the answers to. Amir did not have his glasses while taking the test, so he missed several questions that he knew the answers to. And Amir missed several questions that he knew the answers to because while taking the test, he did not have his glasses on. That one's hard. So, because he did not have his glasses while taking the test. I think B is a misplaced.
Excellent.
Yeah.
Because that he knew the answers to comes right after test. And that is not what's being modified. Questions is what is being modified. Good. Good job. Yeah, that was tricky. And the reason it became so tricky, Joey, is because we've got lots of prepositional phrases in here acting as adjectives. We've got lots of things going on. There's all kinds of modifiers in these sentences. And that's when we write, that's how we write. We don't just use one modifier per sentence, right? We might have single word adjectives and adverbs. We might have some prepositional phrases. We might have a verbal phrase. We might have an adjective dependent clause all in the same sentence.
Right.
So which of the following sentences has a misplaced modifier?
Okay, so Jane was distracted by the construction outside the classroom while she was taking her test. While taking her test, Jane was distracted by the construction outside the classroom. Janine was distracted while she was taking her test by the construction outside the classroom. I think B is none. So while taking her test, that one's good. Janine was distracted by the construction. Okay, so outside the classroom, construction outside the classroom. While she was taking her test, should be closer to Janine. And Janine was distracted while she was taking her test by the construction. Okay. By the construction outside the classroom. So I think A, but I'm not sure. That's a hard one.
Actually C.
C, okay.
Yeah. And again, it's that while she was taking her test that confused you because you thought, okay, that's some kind of a modifier, but it is a dependent clause, right?
Okay.
It's got the she was taking. We know that she is replacing Janine. So we know that those are the two things that are happening at the same time. And we also know she was distracted by the construction. We know the construction was outside the classroom. We may not like the way it's put together, but it actually is correct.
Okay.
C is wrong because she was taking her test by the construction. That's the problem right there. Okay. Which of the following sentences has a misplaced modifier?
John is one of those lucky people who make over 100,000 a year. So I would say that's fine because people who make over 100,000 a year describes people. John loves visiting Vermont in the fall where his family has a cabin. In the fall. So that sounds weird. I'll go back to that. John, who makes a lot of money, considers himself to be very lucky. So who makes a lot of money describes John. So the John loves visiting Vermont in the fall, where his family loves visiting. I'm not sure about B, but A and C are correct.
Yeah. So let's look at where his family has a cabin,
That's
because there is your adjective clause. And what noun is it modifying?
It's modifying Vermont.
Exactly, but that's not the noun it's the closest to.
Fall is the closest. Okay.
Yeah. So how would you fix this sentence? Because you got this prepositional phrase in the fall, acting like a modifier. And first of all, let's look at in the fall. What is that modifying?
Visiting.
Yeah, it is. It's visiting. It's modifying the gerund, actually, visiting. Okay.
Okay.
So, and it's fine because it's close enough to that. So that's not the problem. If we just say John loves visiting Vermont in the fall, if we ended our sentence there, we'd be fine. So in the fall is okay. The problem is where his family has a cabin. We've got to get that closer to Vermont, which means we do have to move in the fall, not because in the fall is in the wrong place, but because it's interfering.
Yeah.
So where can we put in the fall?
You could put it at the front in the fall, comma, John loves visiting Vermont where his family has a cabin.
Perfect. There you go. Good job. Yay. Which of the following sentences has no misplaced modifiers?
Sue left her hat in the museum that her mother made. Sue left the hat that her mother made in the museum. In the museum, Sue lost the hat that her mother made. So A has a misplaced modifier because I don't know which noun it goes to. So left her hat. Did she leave her hat in the museum that her mother made, or did she leave her hat in the museum and the mother made her hat? So that's confusing. And then Sue left the hat that her mother made. Hat that her mother. I think that's Sue left her hat where in the museum. I think that one's okay. In the museum, Sue lost the hat that her mother made. That works. In the museum, yeah, that one's good.
C is good. Okay, let's go back to B.
Mm-hmm.
Read it out loud again, nice and slowly.
Sue left the hat that her mother made in the museum. So can push it in the museum or her mother made it in the museum. So
exactly. Did she leave it in the museum or did her mother make it in the museum? Absolutely. So the only correct one is C. Good job, Joy. Yeah, they're a little tricky. They're a little tricky. That's why I encourage you to go back and watch this again. And those of you that are viewing this, you can always go back and watch it again, and you can pause on areas that are a little bit confusing. You can also pause the video before the dancing letters show up so you can try to get the answers correct. Okay, so let's do a little quick review. Those are all of our phrases and clauses that function as modifiers. Modifiers are adjectives or adverbs that describe or otherwise change the reader's idea of another word in the sentence. Single words, prepositional phrases, verbal phrases, and dependent clauses can be modifiers. To avoid a misplaced modifier, all modifiers must be carefully placed so readers know exactly which word is being modified. To avoid a dangling modifier, writers must make sure the word being modified is actually written in the sentence, not just implied. Okay. And that is our workshop on misplaced and dangling modifiers. Joey, thank you so very much for being here and going through these workshops with us. We'll take a little break, and then maybe at some point we'll come back and do one on pronouns. All right, you take care.
Bye.
Bye.